we will get started. Um, okay. Just to let folks know, this call is being recorded and it will be sent out afterwards as well. And if you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat. I'm Katie Hayden, she, her. I'm with New York City DSA and a member of the Green New Deal Campaign Commission, and we're excited to have you all here. We've got a packed agenda and some really amazing speakers, so we're going to get right into it. If we can go to the next slide, please. All right. So the Green New Deal Campaign Commission has been a national DSA body since 2019, and Building for Power is the current campaign that we've been running since it was voted at a national priority at the 2023 convention. We support DSA chapters like, many of you belong to, who are running strategic campaigns to expand public services like mass transit, social housing, public power, and public spaces like schools and parks. We're having this call right now because this work is more important than ever. I don't know where you all are coming in from. I'm here in New York City. If it didn't break 100 today, it certainly feels like it did. It's hot as hell. And because of and despite the onerous federal terrain, we've been fighting for and winning local Green New Deal campaigns. And we have a strategy to keep winning. Our strategy builds strong chapters, levels up organizers like many of you, strengthens unions, and brings them together to keep fighting for the future that we know that we can build. And we will do it all while we face all of the immediate threats from fascism and end times capitalism and accelerating climate change. So we can move on to the next slide. And that's what everyone's here to talk about. Why we're still fighting for a socialist Green New Deal. We have 8 speakers lined up, starting with an analysis of the current political terrain for eco-socialism from Thea Riafrancos. Thea is a professor of political science, strategic co-chair at Climate and Community Institute, and a DSA member, as well as a former GNDCC leader. We're then going to hear from socialists who are in office or soon to be in office. So we'll have Assembly Member Sarahana Shrestha from the Mid-Hudson Valley DSA, who helped us pass the Build Public Renewables Act in the New York State Assembly. We're going to have Kelsey Bond from Atlanta DSA, who is running for City Council. And we have Alex Brower from Milwaukee DSA, who just won a seat on the Common Council and ran on a public power platform to replace We Energies. We can go to the next slide. And then we'll hear from some DSA organizers and union leaders. So we'll have Michael from Louisville DSA's Get on the Bus campaign. We'll have Sam, who's going to talk about DSA LA's Green New Deal for public schools and the Mass Transit for All campaigns. We'll have Nick, who is a member of Chicago DSA and an organizer in the Chicago Teachers Union, here to talk about their recent contract wins. And to close us out, we will have our esteemed co-chair of DSA, Ashik, who has been instrumental in shaping eco-socialist organizing and really knows what chapters need from visiting them all over the country. So we're going to stop sharing screen so we can just focus on the folks that are talking. And I'm going to pass it over to Thea.
Thank you so much. Literally couldn't imagine a better moment for both good and bad reasons to have this conversation. I'll get into that a little over the next 10 minutes or so. But what I want to sketch out today is kind of a twofold thing. I want to first kind of make an argument for why the Green New Deal, I think, remains like an extremely relevant organizing, mobilizing, and policymaking vision to our moment, right? As relevant as it was 6 years ago when maybe we first started organizing around this, as it remains today. And I also want us to think concretely about the political terrain, both in terms of what the threats are and what the openings are. So that'll be kind of an overview of what I'll speak about for the next moment. I think that it is just impossible to ignore. Like even in the room that I'm sitting in, I turned off my really old air conditioner because it's too loud and wonky to have during an event, right? But so here I am sitting in like 90 degrees New England heat to chat with you all. And I'm sure many of you, since like there's a historic heat wave around the East Coast and Midwest, are sitting in this heat dome, right? And like, what, so 2024 was another record-breaking year for global temperatures. I'm sure 2025 will break the record again, right? So we are in the thick of the climate crisis. We're in the heat of the climate crisis. We're seeing our electricity grids be strained. We're seeing like really concrete physical effects on people. Like I just learned that yesterday, 150 people simultaneously fell ill during a New Jersey graduation event in what's being termed as a mass climate casualty. Like they're okay, but they all were sick and like the graduation was interrupted, right? Dozens of people just in the past 24 hours have gone to the hospital due to heat-related illness. And so this is really real. And this is 2025. It's not some distant future. It's not a sci-fi novel. It is the reality that we live in right now. But it's also intersecting with this other reality that also I'm sure many, if not all of us are living through, which is the cost of living crisis, right? And I think that that is like the unique insight of the Green New Deal is to bring together the economic terrain and the climate terrain and to show how those are deeply connected in material ways, right? And so we know that like working class and even middle class so-called households are struggling paycheck to paycheck and like unable to get themselves into an economically secure situation. And we know, I know I'm speaking to the choir, but like the climate crisis is exacerbating that. And what's interesting is like it goes in both directions, right? So on the one hand, we have extreme temperatures, meaning that we're all paying more to these, private utility companies. We're all going to pay more for the basket of food that we get at the grocery store. If you are a homeowner, we are, and there are many low-income homeowners out there, so we need to think about that too when we're organizing around housing. If you're a homeowner, you're facing higher insurance costs, right? And if you're a renter, like many Americans are, you're also seeing how the climate change is affecting the physical plan of your building. Your landlord ignores it. You deal with those costs, right? On the other hand, like if you don't have a lot of economic resources, as most Americans don't, you can't afford the green upgrades, the nice heat pumps, the solar panels, the stuff that should be abundantly provided to all working class people is just not available. Electric vehicles still super expensive in the US, right? And, God forbid you are in a climate emergency, your house is flooded, it's affected by wildfire. You cannot afford to move and like forget about where the federal government is going to help you out right now, right? And that brings me, just to lay out a little bit more about the political train, like we all know this, Trump is dismantling any climate protections, disaster preparedness, even the weather service for people to be on alert and be aware of how these extreme weather events might affect them, and any policies to get us out of the fossil capitalism economy that we live in and are affected by. But of course, we also know the Democrats are not offering any positive vision to counteract that. They're not even really consistently calling him out on the negative things that he's doing, let alone like offering a vision of working class green abundance, right? That would actually address the crises that we face, right? And so what does an alternative look like? One thing that we like to talk about at Climate and Community Institute, where I do a lot of my policy work, and we've done a lot of work with DSA, including for BPRA and public power campaigns and other such things. We talk about climate policy we can touch. Climate policy that doesn't feel abstract or like, just talking about the atmosphere, right? Like climate policy that actually relates to the grievances, demands, and visions of working class people. And that can be felt at the kitchen table, in the workplace, in our classrooms, in our neighborhoods, right? That is like really concrete and both delivers on the climate targets at the same time that it materially uplifts working class people. So, what would this look like? Fortunately, as was, just addressed by Katie, we have an amazing example of this, not only among the folks in this call, who I'm super inspired to hear about, but of course, we just got the amazing news yesterday that 50,000 volunteers in a campaign closely coordinated with NYC DSA knocked on 1.5 million. Some people say 1 million doors. It's 1.5 million doors around all 5 boroughs to elect Zoran Mamdani, an unabashed democratic socialist who also has been deeply committed to eco-socialism, right? From shutting down polluting power plants to being an advocate for public power in New York and more. He will be now the next Democratic candidate for mayor of the largest American city and a center of global finance, right? It's not just, we all live in cities and towns. I live in a small city, Providence, but like, let's be, I'm from New York, so maybe I have a little of that bias. New York City is like a major global city for a socialist government to be governing, and like has that reverberating effect where it's like, if it can happen there, it can happen anywhere, right? And not only did all these door knocking happen, all of this campaigning happen, all of this amazing like proto party work on the part of New York City DSA, but it unfolded during a historic heat wave in which ordinary people were understanding and feeling the brutal heat, understanding the connections with their electricity bills, with their affordability, with the risk of like their own displacement from neighborhoods they can no longer afford, right? And so that was like crystal clear to folks, and the way that that was addressed on the doors was really spectacular. We can all learn from. I'll just make a few more points before I close it out. So, one thing that's really inspiring, particularly and for our purposes about Mamdani's campaign, and again, it was a collective campaign, it's not just about him as an individual, is the way that he leaned into that intersection between green and affordability, between the climate crisis and the crisis that working class households are facing. And I want to shout out, and I'll put it in a link in the chat in a moment, that my comrade Batul Hassan, who's a New York City DSA leader, who's also a colleague at Climate and Community Institute, she has a great article in Jacobin on how his housing policy is climate policy, how his schools policy is climate policy, his transit policy is climate policy, his grocery policy is climate policy, right? And we could get into all the weeds there, but she spells it out better than I could, and I think it's something for us to learn from. And, so let me just kind of end with a couple closing points. We know that to address the climate crisis at scope and scale, we have to change everything. That is a daunting task that like can overwhelm us, but also is what gets us up in the morning and what gets us through those long meetings and long campaign work. But there's always this question of like, where do we begin? Like, how do we transform everything, right? And so I want to think about us like starting with the society we want. Like, let's imagine it. A society that's built for human and natural flourishing, a society that's democratically governed by the multiracial working class for the multiracial working class. That's our goal, right? How do we get from there backwards plan to today amid the kind of violent polycrisis of racial capitalism and climate crisis that we're living through every day, right? So we want to go from that horizon to the present. We have to ask ourselves, like, how concretely in a stepwise fashion do we get green social housing for all? Do we get clean transit for all, a publicly owned energy system, and so much more, right? So what are those campaigns in the present that are building blocks to the future, right? Which I think like helps us reframe a little bit, right? It's not about, is this a reform? Is it incremental, right? Is it small? Is it big? It's like, does it put us on the path to the horizon and the future that we want to build? And can we tangibly show that our policy gains and our electoral gains, our legislative gains and our mutual aid gains are creating the seeds of the future in the present? Right? Because it's only through these forms of concrete, situated organizing, and also new forms of democratic socialist policymaking with our socialists in office that we can transform the terrain today and expand the horizon of possibilities. Because doing that work reinforces the idea, it reinforces our collective confidence that shared struggle can remake the world one day at a time. Thank you so much, and I'm so excited to hear from the rest of our comrades on this call.
Thank you so much, Thea. That got me so hyped for the rest of our speakers, for the work that we're doing here. And I see that our comrade Matt had put Batul's article in the chat, so please click on that. Please read it. Just really amazing stuff here. All right, so next we are going to move on to our next speaker, who is Assembly Member Sarahana Shrestha from Mid-Hudson Valley DSA. Take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Sarahana Shrestha. So yes, I represent Mid-Hudson Valley in the State Assembly, which is the lower chamber of our state legislature. And actually, the way I got into running for office is when Zoran was our lead person in the assembly for the Build Public Renewables Act. And through working on this campaign, I was learning very quickly about what the political obstacles are, especially on climate policy, but also climate policy that is, intersecting with equity and with the economics and also, worker rights and so on. And what I experienced was that actually a lot of people who are elected don't understand this vision that we have of the Green New Deal. So that's a big obstacle right away. People are, trying to check a list and being like, okay, this year we did, one climate policy, we're done for this year, next year we'll do one. But what we went with, as a DSA-led coalition with the Public Power New York Coalition is a plan to not only try to meet New York's necessarily ambitious goals for renewable energy, but also do it in a way where it's not just about a few technical fixes here and there, but to ask the question right away, who does energy belong to, right? So that's what we started with. And in New York, we have this weird system where, the supply side of the energy is separate from the delivery side, which is, the corporate monopolies running the delivery infrastructure, which also creates this confusion for what people understand when they see their bills. Half of it is a supply, half of it is delivery, and nobody really understands like what is being regulated, why it is the way it is, and so on. So we wanted to ask the question of two things, because as socialist state legislators, what we are eventually interested in is creating a positive role for the government. What we are dealing with first and foremost is just this lack of faith in not only in our government, but basically in what democracy can get us. And I think we see that as a very clear contrast between what happened with the Trump election and what happened with Zoran's primary election last night. So that's an example of the apathy that people have, and that is building in terms of the government with policy and investment being able to actually address the problems that people are experiencing, versus a very clear vision to do exactly that when you are not depending on donors that are in conflict with your goals and interests, and when you are relying on an army of volunteers who honestly are more interested in what we can win through this movement rather than this one particular candidate, right? So our race was also similar in the sense that, people really felt ownership of what we were going to be able to win. And in our case, we absolutely ran on Build Public Renewables Act, which for those of you who don't know, is to authorize and instruct New York Power Authority, which is New York's publicly owned power authority, to build local energy that is publicly owned, that is affordable, and that would create, gold standard for the unions for the first time really in the renewable sector. And in that process, also lower people's utility bills through automatic bill discounts for disadvantaged communities. So this is really, something that we are trying to position, where we're trying to position energy as a public good that can be used to transform our society in a continuous way by using it as something that, invests back in our communities. And what happened when we try to work on this bill is we met, a lot of glazed eyes, right? People who didn't understand the point. Why can't we just subsidize the private developers? That is always, the question that we run into. But, through the organizing that happened and through our race where we ran as a mandate to pass this bill. I mean, we would go to, these rural areas, knock on these big homes and tell them about the Build Public Renewables Act. And I remember this one funny incident where the husband was like, I know everything about energy and this is not going to work. And the wife was like, this is amazing. We should do this, So it was also really fun. But ultimately we won because we made it a mandate and we made it something that is undeniable. And also because one of the things that worked on our behalf was that it was the solution that was directly proposing to solve the problem that we have in our state, which is that lots of private developers were dropping out because one, our grid is in a terrible condition and, interconnecting is very difficult and so on. But the other is these projects are not profitable enough for a lot of these private developers. And also when private developers come to, rural areas, suburban areas, most people don't want those projects there because they're suspicious of these big corporations that they've heard about and so on. So we knew that our solution was hitting a lot of the obstacles, right? We have a proposal where we can more easily gain people's trust if this is going to help with their bills, if this is owned by them, if they have the opportunity to participate in the planning process and so on. And because we know that if we wait for something to be profitable, we're going to run out of time. And we have this amazing power authority that we want to make better, that we want to fully unleash the power of, that would be able to take upfront risks for what needs to happen financially for building out renewables and so on. So I believe we won because we presented the right vision and we built the organizing capacity for it, so much so that, you know, the governor's office was able to entertain a very thin and bad version of it, but we were able to win through the budget process a version that was pretty much our version of the bill. And now we're also doing something different, which is that we are engaged in an implementation campaign, because the other political obstacle we have is you pass a bill and you don't know what happens to it. You know, you never hear back on what you intended to do with the bill is actually happening. So we've been engaged in a very illuminating process where we are forcing the New York Power Authority and the governor's office to have a dialogue with the people who helped to pass this bill to make sure that New York Power Authority meets the ambition that was intended in this bill. The other thing is we have 7 corporate monopolies delivering energy across our state, and everybody's bills are going up, and the utilities are doing a very good job blaming the state's climate goals to say this is why your bills are going up. So this is a very fertile ground for us to have a very active organizing effort, you know, just what Theo was talking about, where it's people's bills and they don't understand why state regulation doesn't work. They don't understand why these companies are allowed to be monopolies. They don't understand why we have to pay all these high salaries of these CEOs, why the PSC always approves half of what the companies ask for. So there's so much discontent. So in our case, we've actually introduced a bill to take over our utility, because we also want to create a model utility for the state of New York and hopefully the country, where it's not just about low rates and environmental justice and, you know, having a grid that is actually meeting the moment, but it's also about community participation and oversight, good governance, accountability, and transparency. Because the other thing is people don't trust the government because we have all these public authorities and we give them specific powers. And sometimes we don't know what's happening in these authorities, and, you know, we don't have a lot of control over who's running them and so on. So for us, it's been really, really exciting to be able to talk both about the supply side and the demand side, and to really start with that discontent. Why is my bill so high? How is this allowed to happen? And we've been able to, you know, convert some of our constituents who came to us with a bill they thought was too high. And now they're able to talk very fluently about what's wrong with this for-profit corporate monopoly model for investor-owned utilities. You know, so we're really trying to make this normally a very convoluted and intimidating topic something that is very easy to talk about, which is that our energy sector is owned by people who are using it as a piggy bank. They don't care what happens to our grid. They don't care what happens to our bills. And in fact, we have this giant perverse incentive where they can make more money and more profits by building out all these unnecessary infrastructure that we don't even need, you know. And I think it's very, very effective when people find out that the whole thing is a sham. You know, then people really want, you know, we want people to feel fired up about taking our power back from these corporations. And what we saw, you know, one thing I always find amusing when people look at successful DSA wins is sometimes I feel like people think there's a button we press and then 50,000 volunteers appear, which is not what happens. You know, people spend, you know, blood, sweat, and tears to make 50,000 people appear, but also you need all of the right ingredients. You know, what makes successful campaigns successful is people ultimately understand what they're fighting for, they understand their role, and they really, really believe that it's winnable. And what's amazing about winning things is that it feels so good, right? We experienced that a little bit last night. Winning is awesome. And I think we have the the organizing capacity and the nationwide organizational structure for winning these things. We have people who are very passionate, and I think the organizing challenge is for people to understand what they're supposed to do, which is how campaigns have been very successful in plugging people into what they can do. And I think that's how we're going to win.
Thank you so much, Sarhana. Yeah, winning is awesome. And thankfully here in DSA, we have a few really good examples of significant and transformative wins that we know can happen when folks organize. So, really thank you so much for sharing your story and how you got to where you are right now. Right now, we're going to transfer over to our comrade, Kelsey, who I mentioned earlier is currently running for office. So I'll pass it over to them now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelsey Bond. I use they, them pronouns. I'm running for Atlanta City Council District 2. I'm also Atlanta DSA's former co-chair and formerly on DSA's National Labor Commission. And thanks everybody who's helped set the stage so far. The Build Public Renewables Act is like the most inspiring thing for us down in Georgia because we just elected our first state house rep, Gabriel Sanchez, this last fall. And so we're trying to build on that momentum to get our first Democratic Socialist into Atlanta City Council. And really happy to be on this call today because a lot of the issues going on in Atlanta right now are really at the intersection of our environment and the economy. And these are threads that I've been really trying to tie together in my campaign. I know that people not from Atlanta call it hot Atlanta. Don't call it that, but it is extremely hot down here. We've seen record heats every single summer. I'm an asthmatic. It's hard to go outside. And at the same time, we're seeing a reduction in our tree cover every year. Funnily enough, our city, bulldozed a forest to build Cop City within the last couple of years, which has been a big environmental fight down here in Atlanta that's really helped, corral this, big movement, with over 100,000 people signing this referendum to put Cop City on the ballot these last few years. And that's also some of the energy that we're using to direct towards our campaign and actually get somebody in there who's willing to fight alongside working people, who's willing to stand with unions, who's going to do an inside-outside strategy to bring the movement into City Hall. And so, we launched our campaign in January because right after Trump's inauguration, because I know how I felt when Trump first won in 2016, and I knew that people needed something positive to direct their energy into. So we've been knocking doors ever since then, and we're doing great. We've raised a lot of money, we've knocked a lot of doors, but some of the issues that I've been highlighting during my campaign that have been going on in Atlanta is, rent is through the roof. Rent has increased nearly 40% since before the pandemic. My district in particular is heavily renter. It's about half renter. I'm a renter. I hear anecdotes on the campaign trail about people having to move every single year just because there's absolutely no regulation on the cost of rent. It's preempted. In the state of Georgia, we cannot cap rent at the city level. And so we have to, engage with very creative solutions to try and control the rent. One of the primary struggles going on in my district in particular is, Atlanta is decades behind where we need to be on public transit. We're an extremely car-dependent city. If you've ever been here, it's extremely hard to get around on MARTA. The bus system we have right now easily gets caught in traffic. We are notorious for our traffic. And so there have not been meaningful developments to our MARTA system in decades and within the actual city of Atlanta. And there was a proposal, proposed about 10 years ago to build light rail around the perimeter of Atlanta. And this project was meant to start directly where my district is. And because it's an election year, our mayor recently pulled the plug on this proposal, even though we've been collecting a sales tax on it for about a decade. There was actually a referendum vote on this in 2016 that passed by overwhelming margins. So between this and Cop City, we've seen that this administration has a real lack of respect for democracy and carrying out democratically made decisions, which just leads to this lack of trust in our government. So people are really ready to see a Democratic Socialist get in there and bring the fight into City Hall. And so, we've been highlighting on the campaign trail how as Atlanta grows, we're expected to see tens of thousands of people move to our city in the coming years. It's a very rapidly growing area. And so we do not have the housing supply to affordably house all the people that are going to move here. And we want to do this in a way that maintains affordability and prevents displacement of the people who have already lived here for decades, who deserve to be able to put down roots here. And so, we've been talking a lot about the need to pair housing with public transit. Recently, there was this development built just north of my district, which has caused a lot of chaos. The development would be paired with a lot of parking next to a very narrow road. And the developer who's been pushing this project is explicitly against rail in the district, which would have, relieved this problem of, worsening traffic in the area. And so we're really seeing these debates, come into play before our eyes as our city is growing. There's this real tension about what direction the city of Atlanta is going to take in the coming years. So we're fighting for walkable neighborhoods, access to public transit, truly deeply affordable housing. And of course, unfortunately, Cop City was already built, but we're trying to build a movement that's resilient enough to make sure nothing like that ever happens again. And something else that's unique about Atlanta is, corporate interests really guide our city policy in a way that I think is unprecedented and very unique to Atlanta. We see, corporations like Coca-Cola and Delta guiding these decisions. These are the very corporate interests behind Cop City. These are the same corporate interests that have been pushing opposition to the Beltline Rail that we want to build. And so we're seeing, a lot of the same issues appear again and again, and we're trying to build a working class movement to actually combat, that corporate influence here in the city of Atlanta, what we call the Atlanta Way. And so, a lot of people down here are super excited about Zoran's victory. We're trying to bring that energy down to Atlanta. Super excited to see how our race develops from now till November. But we're having a great time, and I won't take up too much more time, but really happy to be here today. And I will say also, we've been using the campaign message, we want to win a Green New Deal for Atlanta. And I think that this is really resonating with voters. They're seeing how we can piece all these seemingly disparate issues together. We have put together a very clear narrative for what kind of city we want to live in, what kind of future we want to build for the city of Atlanta. And the Green New Deal has proven to be a really excellent framing for this. So thank you guys for having me.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. I mean, I think that we've seen this in campaigns across the country, that the Green New Deal, the climate, labor are really motivating factors for voters all over the country. So I really appreciate you sharing more about your campaign. And I saw someone drop a link to their campaign in the chat. Check it out, check out their platform, and see if there are ways that we can support Kelsey if you're not in Atlanta from afar. But now I'm going to pass it over to Alex.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. And thanks for the organizers of this event and for the Green New Deal Campaign Commission and the idea that we're going to be re-upping this at the convention this fall. I'm a delegate from Milwaukee. So this is really cool to know that we can support this and get this work back off the ground, because what we're doing here is really, really critical for building socialism. I can tell you right now that if it wasn't for our public power campaign here in Milwaukee, I would not be sitting on the Common Council in Milwaukee if it wasn't for that. And we won in a special election. Really sadly, my predecessor passed away and a special election was called for the within the first year of this 4-year term. The election was held on April 1st. And but the east side, the red east side here of Milwaukee, was not fooled by We Energies on April 1st. And we elected our first socialist to the Common Council, our first socialist to City Hall since 1960 in Milwaukee. So that was really, really exciting. And we were just ecstatic here in Milwaukee, because we cleared a primary field of 8 candidates. And then it was narrowed down. We have nonpartisan elections for local office in Wisconsin. It was narrowed down to me and the candidate endorsed by the mayor. a mayor who at one point was extremely popular, but has now lost. His endorsed candidates have been losing and losing and losing across the city because we have a mayor, just like what Kelsey was talking about, Comrade Kelsey was talking about with the mayor of Atlanta and selling out to the corporate Democratic interests. We have the same thing here in Milwaukee, and this is just reinvigorating me to like stay grounded out of the bubble of City Hall and be fighting our City Hall's establishment as much as we can. We had in our campaign that won 54% of the vote on the east side of Milwaukee. We had 151 unique volunteers in our campaign. We knocked tens of thousands of doors, raising tens of thousands of dollars. It was just incredible. I got to shout out somebody who's here on the call. I don't know if I wasn't able to see the entire participants list, but the Milwaukee DSA co-chair, who was also the deputy campaign manager for our campaign, Andy Barber, is also on this call and will be joining me as a delegate from Milwaukee to support the Green New Deal Campaign Commission agenda as well at the convention. So this is all really cool. And thank you so much, Andy. For being here. And oh, there we go. He just shouted himself out in the chat. That's great. So, we had a huge mass operation. And our yard signs were everywhere, our flyers were everywhere. And how did we actually do that? Because the campaign when we started out was viewed as a joke. By even some on the progressive left and the progressive establishment in the city. And it was actually, some of them thought it was a joke all the way up until we won. So how did we do that? Well, we led on the issues. We're talking about public schools. We were talking about housing for people, not for profit. We were talking about creating a safer and healthier city, standing with city workers. But like I said, the main issue was using this little known law in Wisconsin, Chapter 197 of the state statutes, to replace We Energies, which is our investor-owned utility here in Milwaukee, with a municipal or cooperative utility. So that's what we really campaigned on. And we all know this in this room, but it's worth just repeating that when it comes to the climate crisis, democracy, as Thea, you were talking about earlier, democracy is the solution. Socialism is the solution, right? The liberals out there want to, have regulation. They want to go around with the clipboard police and pretend that we can actually regulate these companies when we know that the only solution is to bring industry under public and worker ownership. I just want to do a little shout out to some of my predecessors who were socialists in the past in Milwaukee here. Our socialist mayor in Milwaukee back in 1914 wrote a book called The Failure of Regulation. I just want to throw the Google book link there in the chat for people to check out. It was his rant against our power company back in 1914, and I quote from that book all the time, every day. Maybe not every day, but I quote from it all the time. And one of the reasons that we've been successful in this, and that we're going to be successful in public office here in Milwaukee, is that we are using the bully pulpit of the office to organize the working class, to rally people around our issues, raise up issues if we can't always be successful in legislation, and to use the offices of city government to basically ameliorate as best we can some of the sharp edges of capitalism. I told my supporters this in the campaign, and I tell people this as much as I can, that we're not going to legislate a revolution, but we can at least, move the working class and move the ball down the field while in office. So for those of you that maybe aren't leaning electorally, I would just say that like running elections, running people for office does so much to change the public discourse in your local area or in your state. I mean, look at Sarah Hanna, what she's been able to do in the legislature and the Build Public Renewables Act. That is just so inspirational. And whether that's a reformist reform or however you want to classify it, right? Like I can tell you what, Sirhana, from Milwaukee's perspective, we saw that victory and it moved our chapter to be more supportive of replacing We Energies and using Chapter 197 here in Wisconsin. So thank you for that. Thank you for getting that ball down the field. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we need to be working on. I would suggest to all of you, comrades, that when you're taking on these fights, that to take on the big picture fights, take on the big fights, take on the things that are, as we say in union organizing, widely and deeply felt, right? That's what we need to take on. That's what we need to be fighting on, because that's what's going to move people to action. the liberal perspective, and I see this in a lot of my colleagues down at the City Hall in Milwaukee, that they, and I see it from other electeds as well who aren't like us and aren't socialists, they think that incrementalism is the most appealing because maybe they can capture the quick small win right away. But we know that even if we get the little tiny win, unless it's part of a bigger picture and a broader plan, or it's just not going to gain the traction with the working class that we need to mobilize people. Zoran's victory with all these tens of thousands of volunteers, right? And these million and a half doors knocked. That is just absolutely incredible. I without knowing a lot of the details of his campaign, I can tell you that just from what I've seen, that what he's talking about, the big picture things in his campaign, and we practice the same thing here in Milwaukee, talking about the big picture things is what's going to get us the goods and get us the victories that can win in legislation, but then also win organizing victories to move the needle and build more of a structure, because we do, want to see socialism in our lifetimes, and we are working, towards a party-like infrastructure in DSA, and I just think that's really important. We in Milwaukee on the east side, were able to completely circumvent, circumvent the Democratic establishment and completely just bypass them. I had a few establishment politicians who like what I do, but for the most part, we were left in the wilderness by the establishment. We had to do our own thing. And that's how we were able to be successful, is by talking about big picture things that the establishment thought we were insane for talking about. But the working class, who can see through the BS, knew exactly, what we were saying and were inspired by what we were talking about. So, I would just say, for those of you out there campaigning, taking on big picture issues that are widely and deeply felt, doing everything you can to build leaders as well. And having people, when they're looking, I always like to tell supporters in speeches, right? Like, don't look to me to be your savior. Look at yourself and ask yourself how you can be a leader. So I would challenge everyone on this call to do that. And if you already are a leader, I would challenge you to develop more leaders in your campaigns and build up those folks, so we can have, the lasting campaign infrastructure and party-like infrastructure that we're building to take this country back. I would just want to say again, thank you all so much for being here. These panelists have been great. I can't wait to hear the rest of the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. Everyone show some love to our socialists in office in the chat. That was absolutely fantastic. We're going to move on to hearing from some of our leaders in local chapters. So I'm going to pass it over to Michael, who's from Louisville, and he's going to speak to the Get on the Bus campaign.
Hello, my name is Michael, he, him. I'm from Louisville, DSA. I am co-manager of our Get on the Bus campaign. That is one of the GNDCC Building for Power campaigns. So I'm talk a little bit about kind of like the groundwork we're doing on the front lines as a Building for Power campaign. So where we got started, we are fighting for public transit funding in Louisville. And the ATU, the Bus Drivers Union in Louisville, we had supported them a few years ago when they were going through contract fights, and we, built a relationship as DSA with them. So obviously, them being on the front lines, they know when it's going to hit the fan. And so they came to us like, hey, we know they're going to run out of money soon, and we need your help. So we started up a campaign, got connected with GNDCC, talked to a couple other chapters that were starting campaigns or had campaigns going, and started doing some of the groundwork to, get connected with people, get people vocal about it. The way funding works in Louisville is like a lot of cities, decades old funding mechanism that hasn't changed despite increasing demands for public transit, and a government that has no interest in doing it, right? And then unfortunately in Louisville, we don't have a mechanism to, do a petition to get a referendum on the ballot. We have to lobby council into kicking one off. So we started a pressure campaign on Metro Council. And then in parallel, it finally hit the fan with the transit agency here, and they hit a fiscal cliff and had to start doing wide sweeping cuts. And obviously, if you remove service from something that is existing, there's no way to do that that doesn't impact people more so than it should. And then, but also in parallel, they had secured federal funding for a network redesign. So something that's tough, if you're petitioning for getting additional funding, there's always the question of like, well, what would they do with it, right? But we lucked out where they ran out of money. They're making all these cuts that's making it miserable for people, which is bad, but it's a good time to organize around. And then they're also redesigning the network, and they're doing a couple things. One, how can we make it be okay with the money we do have, which is good, but still not great. But they're also doing this, what if we got like twice as much money as we had now? What could that big, beautiful transit network be? So all of this is happening independent of what we're doing. So it's, perfect organizing conditions for us. So that was kicked off late last year, and they've been doing a lot of, public comment hearings, things like that. So they've been doing a great job on their end, the transit agency. But we've been able to use that as a tool to organize around. We organize around pressuring the transit agency into doing the, stretching farther, fighting for the better plans and for more money. And then also using that on a pressure campaign against Metro Council. So we've done a few different things. We've done multiple rounds of having volunteers go around to bus stops and put up little stickers that ask you if you're tired of being ghosted by the bus, and then push you to our petition. We had some 30, 40 volunteers go out and sticker, I think, 250 different bus stops around the town. We also had, we have a street team putting up posters, wheat pasting posters, real punk style around town. We have a few hundred of those up. Through those and different tabling events, we have just over 1,200 signatures on a petition calling for Metro Council to start a referendum or fund public transit. We've also had the same demand letter available for organizations to sign on to. And to date, we have 32 organizations that have signed on. That's unions, nonprofits, religious organizations, you name it. And on that list, obviously, as socialists, what we're most proud of is we have 9 unions that have signed on to that, which includes the bus drivers union. We have the teachers union here, unions from some of the major manufacturing sites. They overall represent, I think, like 50,000 organized workers in Louisville. We got the local labor council to sign on, and in that meeting, the president of Kentucky State AFL-CIO stood up unprompted and was like, Democrats have done nothing for us. DSA is the real ones who are out here fighting for, organized labor. We didn't ask you to say that, so that was like this work. Obviously, we want buses to get funded, more buses, more often. But having that connection with labor has been huge. We even got one of the unions here. They canvassed themselves on this issue and got some 300 or so signatures just from their own union members. They did it basically all on their own flyers. They set it all up themselves. So we're very proud of that. Again, we have like 32 organizations that have signed on. And then, as socialists, we have, a different theory of change than some other organizations that might want public transit to be funded, right? And I did an interview with like a public transit kind of walkability related nonprofit on the local NPR affiliate. And I think it was really good for us because, we're talking about we're getting the people involved, we're getting organized labor involved. We don't care what Metro Council thinks, we're going to make this happen one way or another. Versus, a nonprofit that's kind of reliant on the social capital that comes from Metro government or literal capital that comes from them as well. And I think that is a place where we can really stand out for other groups that may just not push hard enough because they're beholden to those powers. Something else we've done too is we made these cute little postcards. And we have had, I think, about 500 of these get sent to Metro Council members. Every day they receive a stack of these in the mail. And they're getting frustrated by it. And so they're starting to, come to the table and talk about what needs done, what would be the money, the percentages that would be needed for a referendum. We're getting the people who run the transit agency to have those same kind of conversations. And then just now we're starting to boots on the ground, knocking on doors. We've had few dozen canvassers knock on, I think, 1,200 doors so far in the last couple months. And this is all just in the lead up. There's no referendum yet. This is just to get people thinking about it and prepared. And, we've had a lot of council members will say, I would support a referendum. I think that's fine, but it would never pass here. And, they're afraid if we did one and it failed, then it would be impossible to ever do one again. So we're trying to show them, look, the whole city is on board for this. There's thousands of them, all the groups, even if you don't care about the people, we know you don't, but we do. We have, all the organizations, all the unions, everybody's on board. And then, now you have to act. And so our chapter just renewed this campaign. We're going to continue pushing and hopefully get Metro Council here in Louisville to put a referendum on the ballot. And then y'all know how DSA works. If it will be on an election, we will knock and call every single person in this city until it gets passed. So, and GNDCC has connected us with, we've been able to learn from a lot of other chapters or campaigns. There's been other chapters that are considering transit campaigns, and we've been able to share what we've done with them. We use GNDCC grants to fund a lot of our early literature before we had started, collecting our own donations from people locally. So we really wouldn't be where we are in this fight without GNDCC's Building for Power campaigns and connecting with all the other chapters and campaigns. So, and again, I appreciate getting invited and talk about the work we're doing, and I'm excited to hear about what everybody else is doing.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think, it's so important to talk about the collaboration between DSA and labor unions, because those are really the only two institutions that working class people have to build power in the United States. That's why it's a central part of the Building for Power campaign. So thank you so much. We're going to pass it over to Sam in LA. And I just want to let everyone know we've got 20 minutes left in our agenda. So stick with us. We have amazing panelists coming up. Sam, take it away.
Thank you, Katie. Hello, everyone. The first thing I will do is set a timer. I will try not to go past 5 or 6 minutes. Hey, everyone. Hey, comrades. I'm Sam Z, he, him from the Los Angeles chapter. Last year, I served as one of the co-chairs of our Power Mass Transit campaign, which is one of the 2 campaigns I will tell you about. First, this is a terrifying time in a lot of ways, I think we know, but the way to respond, that we have to respond, is with solidarity and strategy. And so that's what we're here doing. So shout out to everyone who's here and the work that you've been involved in. And I hope to see a lot of you at convention in August. Okay, I live in Los Angeles. I'm going to tell you about Los Angeles, which is the car and pollution capital of the United States. So let's go us. That's objectively terrible, but I hope everyone agrees. That means there's a real opportunity for eco-socialist organizing in a lot of ways. I'm going to tell you about 2 campaigns that we've run. The first is a Green New Deal for Public Schools campaign that we ran a couple years ago. And more recently, our Power Mass Transit campaign, which we ran for 2 years. It had a couple different goals I'll tell you about. It's no longer a chapter priority campaign, but our work is continuing in a chapter standing committee, our Climate Justice Committee. Okay, first, our Green New Deal for Public Schools campaign. I'm going to tell you something about our goals, the outcome, the strategy we used, and some lessons we learned. The goal for Green New Deal for Public Schools was to build more green infrastructure in the LAUSD school system. Solar panels, electric buses, some things like that. The ability for teachers to be climate champions as a kind of a staff labor thing. The outcome, plain and simple, is we won. What does that mean exactly? We won because the teachers union, in their contract with the school board, in a bargaining for the common good kind of strategy, they included these demands as part of their bargaining, and they won. We worked in solidarity with them. We supported them during strikes. DSA had some shared membership with UTLA, the teachers union, and that was crucial. The strategy was generally twofold. One was relying on that labor solidarity. The second was we had recently elected a DSA ally to the LAUSD school board. So that proved crucial to have an insider elected to help propose and move some things along. Just to highlight some of these lessons, the lessons we learned are labor and elected allies are super crucial. I find that you can often learn more lessons when you maybe fail a little more or don't win as much. This was somewhat, there are a lot more details of the campaign, but this was a somewhat straightforward campaign. We ran with the teachers union and we won a lot of this green funding in their contract. So organized labor relationships, having an insider ally on the school board were both super helpful to this victory. Okay, that was our Green New Deal for Public Schools campaign a couple of years ago. More recently, we have been organizing to try to make the LA mass transit system way better for working class Angelenos. We've run the campaign formally for 2 years. The first year, we had 2 distinct goals. And unfortunately, in LA, this might be similar to where a lot of you live, we had to aim at a bunch of different governments. We didn't have to, but we chose to. The county itself has a metro board that governs the countywide metro system. There are 88 cities in LA County. It is a massive county. We also organized aiming at the city government, which of course is powerful, but much smaller, because they run different parts of the transit system. For the first year, we had 2 goals. We tried to push the countywide metro board to go fareless, eliminate fares. LA collects a super tiny portion of its transit budget from fares, so we thought this could be winnable. The second goal we had was for the city government to put way more public funding into implementing the mobility plan, which is an array of transit infrastructure, rapid bus lanes, bike lanes, pedestrian infrastructure, all that jazz. The second year, we actually, for strategic reasons, reoriented. And at the county level, we decided, because organized labor was not necessarily on board, to say we're gonna stop pushing for fareless transit entirely. We're gonna try to get the Metro board to fund way more public bathrooms in the system. The LA Metro system, which does exist, if you've been to LA, I highly recommend using it, but it is not the most robust transit system. One of the ways it's not robust is there are very few public bathrooms for people to use. So to make the system more usable, we wanted the Metro board to build brick and mortar bathrooms serviced by union labor. We also then at the city level, we did reorient to some degree to try to get the city to bring back fareless bus transit, which they did have for a couple of years. The outcome is that we achieved 2 mini victories. We got the city council, the Metro board to pass motions. These were not big policy changes, not big funding. So overall, we did not meet our goals for this campaign, but we did push those bodies by using some allies we had on the city council and Metro board to introduce motions to, for example, study how much that would cost. This just came out, so we're going to use that as an organizing tool to say, now you must actually take legal action, change actual city policy and funding. Okay, I'm going to get to wrapping up here. The strategy we relied on for both of these is going to sound a lot like Louisville. Shout out to what y'all have been doing in Louisville, Michael. We tried to rely heavily on organized labor. Unfortunately, which is different from the UTLA teachers union strategy here, we've had almost 0 overlapping membership with the relevant transit unions. We have built relationships with the bike share workers union in LA and a little bit with the Metro janitors union, but these have been through electeds or other people connecting us, getting to know each other, trying to work in solidarity. There have not been any obvious contract fights to get involved with, like strike solidarity, which is a super useful thing to do. We relied on organized labor. We did build some relationships. They helped push the Metro board and the city council to pass some of these motions that I called mini victories. Some of the lessons we've learned. Okay, labor, labor, labor. That's the overall lesson. They are key to getting shit done, to be honest. 2, running campaigns can really grow DSA. Can bring in more members, can grow members into leaders, into true organizers. We think some things we need to learn for the future are that for these big goals, like changing a lot of funding, we need to have a longer time horizon. We did not win anything close to what we wanted within a year, within 2 years. And then lastly, organizing riders is really hard. And it's really hard to push a body like the Metro board at the county level here without true DSA allies. We had way more allies in the city council, very few on the Metro board. Okay, there's a high-level summary of our campaigns. We are continuing a lot of this transit work in our Climate Justice Committee in LA. We did receive coaching from the Green New Deal campaign commission from Joe S. from New York. Shout out to you, Joe. Joe was super helpful for us in talking through our ideas, our strategies, our demands. We in LA think that other chapters should absolutely utilize GNDCC coaching. And if you don't have a Green New Deal campaign, a Building for Power campaign, you should absolutely start one in your local chapter. Okay, thanks for being here. Shout out to the work everyone's doing. Let's keep winning.
Thank you so much, Sam. And yeah, shout out to Joe. I don't know if he's on the call, but like he is a fantastic coach and is just, a really great model of the work that we do and the solidarity that folks who are involved in eco-socialism really bring and, to help out their comrades across the country. Talk about why we need to continue this work.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So I'm going to try to keep it tight. Folks have been on the call for a while. Thank you so much for joining us on this. Wow, what day is it even? I'm kind of in a time loop because I'm in New York City. I was born and raised here, and I came back for Zoran's election, which is so exciting right now, and everybody's already talked about it, so I'm not going to belabor some points. I also added this background so you can imagine the future if Zoran is mayor, and we do this all over the country. So you don't see my parents' living room. Um, so I want to reflect a little bit on the development of eco-socialist organizing in DSA over the past decade. I joined as a member in early 2017. It was right after Trump got inaugurated the first time. And a lot of us had done climate organizing. We were activated by the climate crisis and, just the understanding of how scary and bleak it is, and just the understanding of how much would need to change, how quickly. A lot of us were activated by things like the Standing Rock movement in solidarity with the water protectors against the Keystone XL pipeline. But through those first few years of the Trump administration, a lot of us really learned that one, we need a socialist analysis about how capitalism is causing the climate crisis. But it's not enough just to have that analysis. It's not enough just to stand up against things like fossil fuel pipelines and all these projects that are the bad things we want to replace. We really need to be able to move beyond just saying no to things, and especially getting past the barriers with the labor movement, where a lot of workers, do depend on jobs in this economic system that we all live in. So we need to demonstrate a real alternative, and that means bridging the gap between environmentalism and labor movement, which DSA has really played an instrumental role in it over the past decade, as a lot of our speakers have already laid out. But it's a really big shift in decades of organizing in the United States, especially where the capitalists, like the owners of all these energy companies, like very intentionally pitted these movements against each other. So through those years of organizing in DSA, we especially learned how to build an alternative to the kind of liberal alternative environmentalism that does these like market-based solutions, these reforms that don't actually change things. And we really built a lot of solidarity through that organizing. There's a lot that brought us together, from being immersed in this horrible information about how climate crisis could cause the collapse of our society in our lifetimes. That's bad. That feels bad to, just constantly pay attention to. So actually organizing the alternative, like starting to build these campaigns for public power, for public transit, all these things, and starting to demonstrate wins is so powerfully motivating. As Sarahana and others said, like winning is the antidote to, the fear and, like depression that can come from just being fixated on this, which can lead people to pretty bad places in terms of organizing. It just demobilizes you. A lot of liberal groups can be fixated on telling the truth about the climate crisis. But after a decade now, especially, like it turns out to be the case that the right wing, the fascists that are rising, they know about the climate crisis. Their solution to it is horrifying. I don't need to explain it, but we're seeing what the Trump administration is doing, scapegoating immigrants. They have a whole analysis about resources where they don't want to give up the privileges that come from being among the wealthiest people in the world. They want to limit like who has access to that. So like the idea of the middle class, which is disappearing in the U.S., they want to limit that very intentionally, and people on the outside of that, are screwed. So everything that's happening, in Palestine, within the United States, just like racism, like redlining, like all these ways of excluding people, is an ecological way of thinking that is horrifying, and it shaped a lot of how the United States developed in the past century. And that's something we need to organize beyond. That has to be our organizing project. So this is why Zoran is such a powerful example right now. That's why we're all talking about it. I don't think we all intended to, spend so much of the call talking about it, but it's really powerful. He's talking about basic demands like free buses, affordable housing, childcare. These are climate demands. These are about actually improving people's lives. And yes, lowering carbon emissions, but the point is people's lives have to and can improve through tackling the climate crisis together. So some of you might have heard, this discourse about abundance, that, these, the whatever Democratic establishment is trying to claim this, I don't even fully understand how they're talking about it. But in the last days of his campaign, you might have seen Zoran kind of just very earnestly engaged a bunch of them and was like, yeah, I like abundance. Abundance is actually a good value. Here's how I'm talking about it. We need universal public services that are publicly owned, that actually give people things using the public sector. So that's a positive vision that also counters types of environmental thinking that have been kind of common on the left. The idea that we should all do with less. But as eco-socialists, we want to show that this is actually a better way of living for most people. But we do need to tackle the highly unequal way that our society is structured right now. So I'm thinking about a panel that I was on with Theo Riofrancos last year at Socialism Conference that was called An Eco-Socialism That Builds, What's Next for the Green New Deal, where we reflected on a lot of the types of organizing that we had been doing when Green New Deal broke through the Bernie campaign and AOC, and it felt like a very kind of hopeful opening for the left to make this federal politics. And then a lot happened. The pandemic happened, Biden's presidency happened, and it's felt like a retreat in a lot of ways that I think has caused a lot of us to reflect about is the Green New Deal even the right framing? Is it viable? Like, how is it viable? So I think at the federal level, as clearly a lot of opportunities are really blocked and there have been major setbacks. This is why we've been focusing on these local campaigns to demonstrate what the alternative is. So you've heard about all these great examples of how people really are building for power. And we need to have those models ready because things are going to keep falling apart. Like, things are really bleak, but people are really grasping for signs of hope here. And that's why Zoran is resonating so much. And we really have so much work to do. And I think the huge challenge, but also a huge opportunity for us, is that the entire built environment of the United States, like much of which was created after the New Deal, after the World War II, manufacturing boom that happened, the auto industry exploded, all the highways were built in this country, and choices were made to, shut down trains that actually had been the most common mode of transit in the country. The military-industrial complex really blew up and became a core part of the U.S. economy as U.S. imperialism grew over the past century. That shaped how the auto industry developed and all this manufacturing developed in this country. There was this new social compact after the war where masses of workers who had been really radical, like a lot of radical labor organizing happened that made the New Deal possible, that was like really a compromise with capitalists. All these, the social compromise happened where a lot of workers had great jobs now that they didn't really have before. They had more security economically, they had mobility that came from that. A lot of them got to move out to the suburbs, and like private home ownership was really expanded. That infrastructure is falling apart right now. Like every few weeks, you hear about some new bridge collapsing, housing collapse, like all these horrible infrastructure disasters. Like the airline industry is a disaster right now. So all these things are happening that are showing lots of people about what is clearly not working, that had really been built up. Like the American dream of the 20th century is really not working for most people anymore. So that's an opportunity, like all these expectations that have been built up for Americans for the past 70 years, that's now kind of decaying. That's an opportunity for us to show what the next system is, what the next alternative is. It can be abundant public transit and social housing and public power. Like all these things like are made urgent by the timeline of the climate crisis, but they also can just improve people's lives all over the country. So this is why, in New York City, but and I was in Michigan recently around the Great Lakes, which is the largest source of fresh water in the world, which is going to be a site of political struggle for the next century, right? So all these things are happening. There's a chapter in Michigan, Saginaw Bay, that's having a fight over their bridges that have existed for the past century now being privatized. So all these fights are happening to keep things in the public sector so they work for all people and not just for the profits of a few companies. And we really have to be thinking beyond cycles of just a few months or a few years in our campaigns. We have to be thinking about, what we have managed to do over the past decade since DSA and a new democratic socialist movement has expanded in this country. We can really take stock about what we have helped build and what possibilities we've helped open up. And we need to be thinking about the rest of the century in really, really material terms about what it's going to take to win those things in terms of labor power, in terms of how we engage with elected office, how we build a party to do all this. So I guess I just want to wrap by talking about a thread that's really come together powerfully for me in the past year, which is internationalism. Like there's the huge animating issue of the past year and a half at this point for a lot of us on the left in the United States has been Palestine, the genocide in Gaza that has been funded by U.S. military aid to Israel. That's forced a lot of people on the left in the United States to think much more concretely about internationalism. Which is something that actually motivated me to take the climate crisis seriously in the first place, because my family is from Bangladesh, which is a country that I grew up knowing my whole life. Bangladesh is on the front lines of the climate crisis and rising sea levels. My parents left in the 1980s, and I was born and raised in the U.S., but I just really had this knowledge about what was ultimately causing a lot of people to leave Bangladesh and come to the United States or other parts of the world. So over the past year, it's been really powerful to see how Palestinians and Arabs and Muslim Americans, mostly second generation immigrants, have been so politicized, especially through the 2024 presidential election. We had the uncommitted movement that really organized a lot of people to show their power at the ballot box and show that they're, a huge growing mobilizing force in places like New York City, like in Detroit and Michigan. And won't stand for genocide backed by the U.S. But these are the same people who are also can be activated around the climate crisis and things that improve their lives here in the United States, and also ultimately the homelands they come from. So just bringing it back to Zoran's campaign, one of the groups that he really powerfully mobilized in New York City are Bangladeshi immigrants who like in my lifetime have just never really been organized to the level that they have been around this campaign, because of a lot of intentional work that was put in through community groups, especially tenant and labor organizing groups that represented Bangladeshi tenants and workers. So to see them turn out in such huge numbers, like in his acceptance speech last night, Zoran shouted out like the Bangladeshi auntie who knocked doors until her feet are sore. That's so powerful, and it's not just like a token kind of identity or representation thing like Democrats love to do. It really is like a class politics that's coming together. Bangladeshi immigrants in New York City are now, I think, the third largest language group in the city. They also have this, just knowledge about imperialism and the climate crisis through their own life experience. So that to me is the basis of the climate politics of the 21st century. You have people who are part of the working class here in the United States who want to organize to improve their own material interests here. But then as we do that, as Zoran's going to be mayor now, there are going to be huge challenges. But those are hundreds of thousands of people in the richest city in the world who are raising expectations. Like that's the basis of not just transforming our own infrastructure here. It's also the basis of eventually, knowing the international basis of the climate crisis. That is the working class formation that's going to eventually influence U.S. military policy, that can eventually influence whether our mass politics are strong enough to force this country to pay trillions of dollars that are owed to people in the global south to help mitigate and adapt to the climate crisis. So there's a lot of really big stuff that we need to think in really holistic ways. Public transit is so important for us here because more public transit in the U.S. isn't just something that improves people's lives here. It also means less demand on lithium from Bolivia, so that the lithium that powers electric buses is going to be a lot less than what would go to like Teslas that are owned by Elon Musk. So there's less pressure for Elon Musk to do a coup in Bolivia, right? So this is like solidarity with people abroad starts with like also changing conditions for people here in the United States, and it's all really intertwined. So all this has to come together in very concrete ways for us to survive this the next few decades together. We just have to keep organizing for it. I take so much hope from what DSA members are doing. We're getting open socialists elected all over the country who are standing up for these things, who have this vision. Organizing labor unions to help organize this. The Build Public Renewables Act in New York was shouted out, which came about through so much struggle from members of New York City DSA and DSA around the state. And that's now delivering. Like, despite efforts to block it, the state government in New York, one of the largest economies in the world, has committed to 6 gigawatts of renewable energy, which is not as much as was demanded, but it's still a huge step. And $200 million of the budget is being delivered for green jobs, which, again, just like emphasizing the importance of labor here, like green jobs are being created to demonstrate the alternative here. So yeah, all this is coming together, and DSA is helping make it possible. The same people who are standing up for, who are making climate demands possible, are the same ones standing up for Palestine, advancing the BDS movement to target, the state of Israel with sanctions. So yeah, the same unions that are standing up for who are making climate demands possible are the same ones organizing for an arms embargo against Israel. So just all these things come together, and we are organizing as internationalists, as eco-socialists. We're building the future that we know we need. So thank you for being on this call, and I hope you keep organizing these campaigns where you are, because they all have to come together very quickly. So it's really important work. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ashik. And thank you to everyone who was on a part of the panel today. I feel like, we heard so many different perspectives. I'm really motivated to continue the work that we're all doing here. I just want to say that if you're not a DSA member, please sign up. If you are in a chapter that wants to start a Building for Power campaign, reach out to us. If you are going to the upcoming DSA convention, please support our priority resolution and spread the word about it. And if you or members of your delegation to the convention have any questions,